Hey everybody, Screw You here, aka Jake, and today we are going to talk about something related to Dominion and specifically cantrips. We're going to talk mainly about when you don't want to put cantrips in the deck, how they might actually hurt you, because there are a few aspects to this that I don't think a lot of people think about. So here's what we're going to cover. We're going to briefly talk about what cantrips are. Then we're going to cover discard attacks, drawing them dead, and other concerns about them like opportunity costs. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. What we're calling a cantrip here is anything that says plus card plus action on it. So effectively, it's replacing itself. It's not taking up anything in your deck. It's kind of a nothing card. So any benefit that it gives you is itself plus whatever you draw with it. So it's kind of like bonus value. So when could this be bad for your deck? So before we get into that, I want to clarify what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you shouldn't buy cantrips, or when these things are true, you shouldn't buy cantrips. What we're going to get into here is the drawbacks that maybe you haven't thought about, that cantrips may be adding to your deck, but the value of the cantrips can still outweigh that, especially with some of the higher value ones like Grand Market or Groundskeeper. A lot of these factors are a little more subtle than the benefits that these will provide to you, and it's still worth it to buy them. So without beating around the bush too much, let's get into the biggest one, the one that I think that people struggle the most to understand or to see, that adding a cantrip can be worse than adding nothing. Discard attacks is what I'm talking about. Anything that forcibly reduces your hand size. And I'm talking about the ones that have you choosing what you're discarding. We're not really talking about minion or pillage or relic or anything. We're talking about the more traditional discard attacks like militia or ghost ship or something like that. Now, being hit consistently by a discard attack is the biggest reason to think twice before putting a cantrip in your deck, especially when you're thinking about grabbing the cantrip instead of nothing. Now, the value of a cantrip can be looked at whatever value it gives you plus the thing that it draws. So if you discard it, it follows that you're kind of discarding both. So, in other words, it's worse because you don't have information about the card that you are discarding. Discarding a cantrip that you have in your starting hand, the card that you're about to discard with it really is shrouded in mystery. You don't get to choose. If, for instance, you're hit by a militia, you have 5 cards in your hand, and you keep the 3 best ones, and that softens the blow because you can discard the ones you don't need, or that you need less. And Dominion doesn't have anything that has a random discard mechanic, that has like discard a random card from your hand. But discarding a cantrip is as close to that as we get. So having them when you're being hit with those attacks is kind of a liability. Now, let's take an example just to illustrate this. We're going to pretend we're looking at a 3-player game. And player 1 over here has not bought any cantrips. Every time he has hit 2 or fewer, he just bought nothing. Player 2 over here, every time he hit 2 or fewer, well, not fewer, he bought patricians. Now, player 3 plays a militia on them, and what these two people both want to do is get a gold. That's their goal for the turn, so they get hit with militia. The player 1 over here can just discard his estate and his copper, and he can still get the gold. Now, player 2 has the same cards, effectively. He has the same hand, except that he starts with 2 patricians, and these guys here are waiting to be drawn. Now, there is no situation that he can manufacture where he gets to buy a gold on his turn, because he has the cantrips, at least not if the silver is under the estate. And you see here a situation where the cantrips are not only failing to help, but they're actually harming his deck. Now, the big exception to this with discard attacks is Caravan Guard. Caravan Guard is a cantrip. that is kind of looked at as one of those why not, because it's basically a nothing card thing, but you know, obviously counters the attacks by its special ability. So the other big reason that you are going to want to think twice about the cantrips is kind of applicable to all of Dominion. We're going to talk about opportunity cost, what you would have gained instead. Basically, whenever we say opportunity cost, we're talking about whatever the next best option would have been. So the value of the cantrip is, again, what it does plus the card it draws. Now, you want to think about what that card is likely to be, and then decide whether a card that delivers more payload but doesn't draw would make your turn better. So if you are especially thinking about a cantrip that isn't guaranteed to give you any value by itself, like if you're thinking about opening with a chariot race, there's a really good chance you're going to lose that chariot race and then draw a copper, so you're not really helping yourself, as opposed to putting a silver in the deck, which gives you the 2 money, whereas drawing with a chariot race doesn't even necessarily give you the 1. So you want to think always about the opportunity cost, what you would have bought instead of the cantrip. But that's true of every buy in Dominion. So I think it's just more prominent with cantrips because they deliver less payload by themselves, because part of their value is the card underneath them that's to be drawn. Now, so there are some other miscellaneous concerns that I want to bring up. Mostly we save them for the end because they are pretty obvious or self-explanatory or what have you, but they are still important. Now, you could draw them dead. If you are playing a deck that has smithies and either doesn't have villages or has a really unreliable village or not very many of them, then having the cantrips in your deck are cards that you could draw dead with your smithy, so that's bad. And if there is a pile-up concern, obviously the cantrips aren't the same as nothing if they could end the game, and then we get into Wall and Wolf Den because, you know, even though they don't take up deck slots, they are still cards, and if you buy a cantrip while there's Wolf Den out, then you're obligated to buy another copy of it. So I wanted to make sure that we hit on the different aspects of how cantrips may be able to harm your deck instead of just failing to help it sufficiently. So let me know if there is anything you think I missed in the comments, and otherwise I will see you next time.